Before we talk about how to fix zombie arm, let me make a few comments about how he came down with zombie arm to begin with. I think the main reason that we have the zombie arm syndrome is we simply don't know what we're doing with this non-hitting side and arm. The coaches usually don't practice it or don't focus on it. We don't have a mental model or a pathway what we're supposed to be doing with our body during this process. So if we don't know what we're doing, we're lost, right? And so this arm becomes droopy and lost out there. I would say the correct model for correcting zombie arm is something I call setting the spring. Remember in the last video series, Ripple of Power, we talked about how on the hitting side of our body, we drive energy into the ground, then up through our leg, into our pelvis and hips, expressed into our arm and hand in the stroke itself. So in order to fix zombie arm, we really have to focus on the other side of that spring-like release in Ripple of Power. That's the non-hitting arm, shoulder, feet, and toes. The first step in this process is to keep the non-hitting hand on the racket as we turn our hips and shoulders in the initial take back, as we see Roger Federer do here. The second step is when the non-hitting hand releases from the racket, we still want to keep the non-hitting arm and hand back, as we see Roger does here. This preserves the turn of the shoulders and hips in preparation for the hit. We don't want the non-hitting arm de-energizing and opening up to the left, as we saw in the first video on zombie arm syndrome. The third step is the most critical step, truly extending and stretching the non-hitting arm, which sends neuroelectrical signals to the muscles and skeletal pivot points in the non-hitting side of the body. Yes, we do want to extend the non-hitting arm to orient, focus, and balance the body in preparation for the shot. But the primary purpose of this type of non-hitting arm extension is to load the entire non-hitting side of the body, the non-hitting shoulder, the back, the side torso, the hips and pelvis, and down into the leg, feet, and toes. If we take a look at Roger from the rear, we can see the two different phases of setting the spring. In the first slide here, Roger's non-hitting hand has just released from the racket. He is orienting and pivoting for the spring action, but he's not quite there. In slide 2, Roger has set the spring. His non-hitting arm and hand are more fully stretched and extended, and this has sent a loading signal throughout the non-hitting side. Of course, in any video or photo, we can only have an exterior view of the athlete's body, and we must be guided by some of the leading thinkers on movement, like Feldenkrais and Labaine, to describe the internal actions of the muscles, ligaments, and skeleton. We can see some evidence of the spring being set here with the load of the non-hitting side of the body, in that we can see the outlines of the load in the twist of his shirt around his non-hitting side, torso, and back. But the clearest evidence of this setting of the spring is that in slide 2 you can suddenly see his left calf muscle bulge, indicating he has loaded his left side all the way down to his legs, feet, and toes. Note that now his weight is on the inside of his left foot and toe. He is ready to unspring the non-hitting foot and leg from this position. This dynamic balance and positioning on the edge of the non-hitting foot is every bit and perhaps more important than the extension of the non-hitting arm and hand. Even those club players who do a decent job of extending the non-hitting hand often stand too flat-footed, and they have not set the spring in the lower part of the body. Before we talk about learning how to practice and learn this setting of the spring action, let me say a few general comments about the approach that we're taking in Tennis Reach. Now, I know more than a few of my tennis friends and coaches out there are saying, Kim, you're giving us too much information, too much background. Why not just show the pros, make it into a quick tip, and be done with it? My answer is that I like quick tips too, and I provide some. But my real answer is what a great tennis player once said. Things should be as simple as possible, but no simpler. I was making that up about Einstein being a great tennis player, but he was a player. The problem here is, as in the movies, what they say about love, it's complicated. Yes, it satisfies our need for instant gratification if everything could be boiled down into a quick tip. Some of my tennis blogger friends called this principle Occam's razor, after the great philosopher who said basically the simplest answer is the best answer, or the most likely answer. Well, I say that's fine. Keeping things simple is fine until it becomes too simple. And then we're really not dealing with the problem appropriately. And in terms of tennis technique, if we just stay on the physical side, we're not dealing with the underlying emotional and mental issues that really are oftentimes stop improvement. The real problem with just focusing on the physical side of the problem, as Moshe Feldenkrais, one of the great movement thinkers of the last century, said, there can be no smooth coordinated action of the executive organs without smooth mental processes, i.e. motivation. To train motivational control, we have to train the resolution of emotions and habits. In practice, however, the uncoordinated man does perform a number of extraneous movements, some to preserve balance, and some stiffening himself because of unwanted elements of emotional aggression, doubt of success, and striving for success. So yes, we could teach the ripple of power in setting the spring by just copying the physical outward movements of these actions. But the real issues come down to something quite differently. We have to overcome our tendency to move the upper torso before the lower torso. We have to overcome our habit of trying too hard, going too quick, moving the racket too rapidly before the body is in the proper sequence. If you watched this Winter Olympic Games and seen some of the interviews of the great champions trying to win a gold medal or repeat as gold medal champions, Shaun White, Mikaela Shiffrin, Lindsey Vonn, they never talk about physical technique. They always talk about emotional and mental issues. They've learned through defeat that trying too hard, overthinking it, worrying about it, is not the path to victory. These are the same kind of lessons we're trying to teach on Tennis Reach, where we're looking below the physical outward manifestations of the technique into some of these subtler, more emotional and mental issues. Enough for now about what the martial arts call the internal arts. We'll develop these themes as we go along in Tennis Reach. Now let's get back to Zombie Arm. In this segment, we focus on setting the spring. In the next sequence that'll come out next week, we'll focus on unspringing the spring, or releasing the spring, taking a close look at Novak Djokovic's great forehand technique. In the meantime, if you want to practice the setting of the spring, I would advise going out and filming yourself, or if you're a coach, filming your player, and look at these key positions that I've identified in this video and compare them to what your player's doing at those points. Once you've internalized the concepts, then I would advise to have someone softly underhand toss the ball as you're hitting your forehand, making you move a little. We don't want to be stationary in these exercises. We see too many players out there with equal weight on both feet trying to hit shots. It's not the way it should be done. We have to achieve what Feldenkrais called dynamic stability, up on the edge of our feet and toes in a sort of an unstable but balanced position, ready to release the spring. Again, this ripple of power is not following the mental model of what most players have in their mind about a tennis swing, which is generally a rotational type of swinging action with the arm from back to front towards the target. If you're doing the ripple of power correctly, you'll feel the unspringing and the uncoiling in the lower part of the body first before anything happens in the upper torso or with the arms or hand. And I guess the last thing you could do is when you see someone out there with the zombie arm going, instead of yelling, extend your arm, which really doesn't mean that much to people, yell out, set the spring.